Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to our channel. Today I have finally finished reading the long list of the Booker Prize for this year. Woo! Cue sort of fanfare and sort of a little firework going off somewhere in the distance. But I've really enjoyed the experience of reading this long list. I know that many people sort of going into the long list sort of initially right at the beginning were kind of quite confused, quite surprised, myself included, about sort of some of the inclusion, some of the books that weren't there. But I think overall this has actually been a really exciting long list for several reasons. Firstly, that we've had a few books that really I don't think anyone expected to see on there. You know, a few kind of creeping in that have been really engaging and interesting to read. For example, we had a few surprises on this list that I don't think people were necessarily expecting. So we have The Seven Moons of Maali Almeida. This was a book that I don't think anyone had seen coming, really, partly because it wasn't out when the long list was announced. I think we also had a few books kind of get onto the list that had been quite loved, so books like Small Things Like These, but that people maybe thought wouldn't necessarily make it over the finish line into being on the long list. And then we had a few others that really I think have just been quite nice, fun, exciting surprises, like Treacle Walker, which again I don't think many people saw coming. So this is going to be my attempt to sort of review this long list as a whole, and I'm doing separate reviews of the books anyway, so this is more just going to be general thoughts on the composition of the long list, and then I'm going to attempt very foolishly to kind of predict what I think will be on the shortlist, fully guaranteeing that I'm wrong. Although last year I got 4 out of 6. I'm also going to put my personal preferences, and that's the thing, because last year the actual shortlist was a combination of my predictions and my personal favourites. So there we go. But let's get into it. So I think firstly it's worth noting that this is just quite a mixed and varied set of books, which seems really obvious because that's kind of the goal in creating a long list. But I think they've all been pretty accessible, really. I think in some years you know, you might have a few books that are really quite wild and experimental or sort of very different. I'm thinking of things like Ducks Newburyport, that is just this completely different book on the list compared to everything else that's there. And I don't think we've had anything really like that this year. Probably the Treacle Walker being one of the closest in terms of that book that's just a bit wild, but even then it's like 150 or something pages, so it's much more accessible to just let that wash over you, and I greatly enjoyed that. We've also had quite a nice range of books from sort of debut authors compared to sort of more established authors, again like Alan Garner. We've also got a few sort of books that are really short, a few books that, you know, even the longest is only around 500 pages, or just under, which isn't actually that wild. Again, if we look at 2019, where I think the average length of the shortlist was something like 450 or something. So actually, you know, overall this has been quite an engaging and interesting list. I think my only real commentary on that is actually some of the longer books on this long list. I felt that length a bit, I think. Review on Booth coming soon, but I did feel like a few of the books could have maybe been shortened a little bit and been sort of cut down a tiny bit. I'm not an editor, so who am I really to say that? But equally, I think what's been quite entertaining about this list has just been how many different topics it then deals with. We've got quite a few books that directly deal with politics and sort of with the current state of affairs. Particularly, actually, it should be said, the US books on this list have especially gone into that, whether, you know, racial injustice around the courts and around sex work in Night Crawling, whether racial injustice again around the courts in The Trees by Percival Everett. We've got Booth, which deals a little bit with sort of previous American history, and sort of in the author's note she sort of makes a bit of a link towards the January 6th attacks in the US. But then we've also got Small Things Like These that deals with the politics of Ireland at a very specific time. And then a book like, for example, The Seven Moons of Maali Almeida, that deals with the politics of Sri Lanka and the kind of particularly kind of inter-party fighting. The Colony by Audrey Magee, that looks a lot at politics regarding sort of language and Ireland again, but sort of particularly around nationhood and statehood and what it means to have a national identity. And then, of course, Glory by NoViolet Bulawayo, which also deals with the politics of Zimbabwe. So quite a political long list in many ways, but again, that's partly to be expected. I guess many books dealing with the big issues that are affecting humans at any given point in time and that deal a lot with human emotions almost naturally have to engage with politics in some form. So maybe that's less surprising, but I suppose it's notable that many of the books that are in this sort of directly engage with politics in some form. And then you've just got a few books that have been quite a mix of genre. So we've got books like Case Study that sort of really sort of blends this line between the sort of psychological reporting and kind of a case study, as the title suggests, with a very sort of literary novel, but with also this idea of really engaging with what psychiatry can look like and all of these sorts of things. We've got something like After Sappho by Selby, Wynn, Schwartz, which just plays with this entire idea of what a novel can be and just plays around really brilliantly, I think, with all of that. So yeah, it's a really mixed list, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a fairly key book by in what I just said, but a really interesting range of books. Oh yeah, Maps Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies, which I haven't spoken about in this video quite as much yet, but will come up when I talk about my preferences and predictions. And on that note, let's go into talking a little bit about what my predictions are. But again, I just really want to say, I think this is a really fun list. You know, I haven't loved every book, and that's never going to happen on a long list. But I have enough that I think I can form a short list that I'd be really happy with, and also even the one that I think might happen instead of that is one that I'd be very happy with. And as I mentioned before, I will be doing solo reviews of all these books. It's just that is a lot to schedule in, so I've recorded most of them are due to come soon. I just need to film the last few. They're coming in the next few weeks. 13 individual videos of reviews is a lot, so thank you for bearing with me on these. And with that, let's get to some predictions. So first, my personal choices, and there is a bit of overlap with what I think will actually happen, but this is going to be an interesting one to see what actually happens in just a bit under 2 weeks time now, really, at the time of filming. So my first and my sort of top choice, I think, the one that I actually do really want to see win, Audrey Magee's The Colony. This is my favourite. This is the one I really want to see win. I've been delighted to see it's been on so many other people's favourites so far as well. I think this book is stunning. I think it says something. I think it has a really strong point of view. I think it is a particularly pressing book when a lot of people are really considering what identities are in a sort of more globalised world where sort of lots seems to have changed. And this book, I think, is just such a beautiful evocation of that. And so I hope this is on the shortlist. I would love to see this book also be joined by Small Things Like These by Keegan. I, again, also really love this book. I think it's just such a powerful book, and I think The Colony and Small Things Like These side by side are a really interesting look at various parts of Irish identity and Irish history as well. So always quite nice when books sort of can sit side by side with each other on a list like that. I would also really love to see Trust by Hernan Diaz make the list. I think this book is really clever. I think it again has a lot to say, and I think it plays around with form in a really interesting way. Sometimes the language of Trust is very simple but very effective, I think, and there's something that just really held me and held my focus with this book that I just really greatly appreciated. So I would love to see that one make it. I think it really deserves it. I also think it's one of those books that, you know, many people each year, and this is an absolutely fair thing, you know, they don't force themselves to read the entire long list and try and rush through it. Many people just enjoy the short list, or like cherry pick the ones they think that sound interesting. I know, how wild is that? And I think actually Trust is also one of those books that actually would appeal to quite a lot of people who are sort of just cherry picking through the list as well. I think it has a degree of accessibility to it, but is also quite challenging. And I think it's a really good book for that as well. I would also then love to see the Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies by Maddie Mortimer make the shortlist. And actually, these first four that I've said are the four that I read before the long list came out. So I don't know if it's partly that I read them in at a slightly slower pace and sort of in my own time and didn't have the Booker Prize sort of long list idea hanging over them. And maybe that's why I've enjoyed them slightly more. But these four have all been books that I have really greatly enjoyed. I think The Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies is just such a powerful debut. It's so inventive. It really hit me hard, and I thought it was just a very clever use of what fiction can be as well. So I really, really liked it. And then that leaves two. And this is where I'm struggling a little bit. And this is where I'm struggling. So my fifth place, I think I would, and this is not in order necessarily. I mean, The Colony is the top, but everything else was kind of in a rough order. I would then have After Sappho by Selby, Wynn, Schwartz. I think this book is really quite clever and daring. I love that it is a novel that doesn't read fully like a novel, but it also doesn't really fully feel like non-fiction. I think this is the kind of the clever, twisty one on the list in that sense of, you know, the one that really blurs what fiction can be in a proper way. I mean, I think Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies and Trust both do some things with that as well. I think After Sappho is just so beautiful. I was really constantly surprised by this because I think I was expecting to sort of read it and be like, oh, this is quite nice. And I really did not want to put this one down. I think I think I ultimately gave it like 4 stars on Goodreads, but this was probably the closest 4-star that was the closest 4-star to a 5, if that makes sense. It's sort of hovering around 4.5 for me. I loved it. I thought it was really clever and really beautiful, and I would love to see it up there. And that leaves the final one, and I am fully torn between two other books that I think were almost 5-star reads for me. And those are Case Study by Graeme, Macrae, Burnett, and The Trees by Percival, Everett. And if I really had to choose on a sort of last bit here, I really don't know where to go, because The Trees feels so pressing. It feels like it has so much to say about this current moment. I also think Case Study is such a clever use of blurring genres. And I would possibly side with Case Study. I'm almost tempted as well to take Maps out and put The Trees in as well and have that as my shortlist. But I think I'm going to opt just for Case Study, only because I think it's a really clever and interesting book, as is The Trees, really, to be fair. So if I can have a shortlist of 7, that would be my shortlist. If I can't, then I think that's where I land. And now predictions, which is actually trickier in some ways, because we have to try and guess what the judges might actually be thinking. And so my predictions, this is, as I was saying, kind of trying to get inside the head of a judge is a weird one, because 5 judges have chosen 13 books, and clearly of those 13, you know, something has come up in each that's really resonated with them. Otherwise, you know, you can't just have one judge who's just put, you know, by themselves pushed one book onto the long list. Other people would have had to have agreed something. So trying here, what I think, let's basically go maybe by the ones I'm fairly sure are there and the ones I'm fairly sure are not there, and then we work out what's in between. So the one I'm fairly sure, well, the ones I think I'm fairly sure will be there are The Colony by Audrey and Magee. I think it's one of those books that seems to have really appealed to so many people, and I think the judges, I'm imagining all of the judges would agree that this book had that. It doesn't feel divisive enough that judges would be entirely switched off from it, is basically what I'm saying. I also think Trust by Hernan Diaz would make the shortlist from the judges. So that's my 2 that I'm fairly sure are there. And I would add the 3rd here that I'm fairly sure is going to make it, which is The Trees by Percival, Everett. One that I'm still, you know, it's within my sort of top half of the draw, essentially. I just can't work out if I have it in my shortlist, just because there are so many good books. I think the judges will put The Trees there. I think it's a really clever book. I think it has a lot to say about this current moment. And I think it's also quite daring to have a book that is about such an intense and difficult and dark topic, but approaches it with this sort of, this real confidence and this real humor. And so I would really love to see it be on that shortlist as well. So those are the three that I'm fairly sure about. The ones I think won't make it are O. William by, oh my gosh, how have I forgotten her name? By Elizabeth Strout. And I am also fairly sure that Booth won't make it. And this is not to say anything bad about either book. I just think on a reread, I think some of the other books can dazzle a little bit more, whereas I think on a reread, O. William and Booth, I don't know. I think some of the other books edge them out in terms of what they're saying, essentially. Treacle Walker is the interesting one, where I can't see how the judges would what they would do with this. I can't tell if they would sort of think this is so wildly inventive it has to be on there, or if it's sort of like, well, you know, the long list was the prize for this one. It's a good book, but these other ones edge it out. So that's the one I'm unsure about. I can't quite understand where the judges will fall with Night Crawling or Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies. It's always really nice to see a debut make it into the shortlist. I don't know which of them might. I can't fully see Night Crawling being there. I really enjoyed it. I think it, again, I think other novels maybe edge it out. Just in terms of maybe the style of writing or whatever else. I don't know why I'm getting so nervous and like sweaty about this, like I'm deciding between my favourite children. You know, like this is a book prize. These 13 books are all going to be celebrated in their own way anyway. I think the judges might shortlist The Seven Moons of Maali Almeida. And I say this mostly because I think this book is also just really quite bold and a bit kind of like nothing else we've seen on this shortlist. It's really quite, in kind of the similar way to The Trees, actually, where it takes a really dark topic and just throws in some really absurdist humour into it. I think this is a really quite profound book, but I also think it stands up well to rereads, basically. At least I get that feeling, having only read it once. But I think this will make it. So this would be number 4 on that list. And then this is where I come up against it, because Glory by NoViolet Bulawayo is one of those books I really cannot gauge how it sort of sits. I thought it was really powerful and really good. A review to come on it separately soon. But I also think that actually, again, I think that other books might edge this out. So I think this is going to be a really tricky one. I really enjoyed it, but I also felt that at times it could have been a little bit sort of pared down. I think I'm going to say that it's going to make the list based on very little. I think probably based on the fact that really that it's just a really smart book. It's a book that plays around a lot with sort of national politics. It's kind of quite a bit of a breath of fresh air in how it does so, even though it's sort of, you know, it leans on an old sort of style of things from Animal Farm, but it reinvents that, I think, in quite an interesting way. So with all that said, I guess what I'm saying is that my predicted shortlist, which I'm almost definitely going to be entirely wrong on, are these 3. So Glory by NoViolet Bulawayo, The Seven Moons of Maali Almeida, and Audrey Magee's The Colony. So I think these 3 will make it alongside The Trees by Percival Everett, Trust by Hernan Diaz, and have I even mentioned a 6th? I'm looking at the list of notes that I've written down and realise I've sort of changed my mind as I'm going. So that's fun. I for the magical 6th place, maybe, yeah, why not? Let's do this. I'm going to say After Sappho. Probably entirely wrong on this. I think the judges will quite enjoy a book that's really quite daring and out there. And I think it'll make it based on that. I think Case Study is potentially the 5th alternate for this as well. So those are my hazy, not particularly informed on anything predictions. But willing to hear yours. I'm really excited to hear what you say in the comments as well. I'm sure many of you will have much more interesting and poignant things to say on these. But I think overall, read the long list, I think, if you can, and if you have the desire. I think it's a really interesting set of books. I'm really glad that I have read them. I now also want to have a bit of a nap and maybe read for pleasure a little bit in the coming weeks and months. So let's see. And who are you rooting for the winner from all of these as well? I'd love to hear those. Take care. I've been Bob the Booker and speak soon. Bye bye.